Be me. Greg, 34. IT support at an insurance company, the kind of job where people only learn your name when their password stops working. Married 6 years to Rachel, together for almost 9. Found out that basically every private thing about my marriage had been read out loud to a room full of women, and I found out from a form that my own wife built. Let me back up, because this only makes sense in order. Rachel works in marketing. She's smart, she's loud, in a way people call confident. And for a long time, I thought I got lucky. We met through a friend of a friend, dated a couple years, moved in, got married, all the normal stuff. Early on, she used to tell me I was different from other guys. Should have paid more attention to how much she loved talking about other guys. Back then, I took it as a compliment. A guy hears, "You're not like the rest of them," and he doesn't stop to ask what the rest of them ever did to her. Anyway, the book club. This started maybe 2 years into the marriage. She wanted something that was hers, a night with her friends, and I thought that was healthy. Told her to go for it, helped her set it up even, hauled folding chairs out of the garage the first night, ran to the store for wine, and those little cheese things nobody actually finishes. Rearranged the living room so it looked less like two people who eat dinner in front of the TV, and more like somewhere adults gather on purpose. She was nervous that first night, kept asking if the place looked okay. I told her it looked great and I meant it. I wanted her to have this. That's the part that gets me looking back, how much I wanted it to go well for her. The group was 5 or 6 women, rotating a bit over time. Danielle was the center of it. Danielle does HR at some mid-sized company, and she has that energy where she's technically nice to your face and you still feel like you're being evaluated. She hosted most nights once the club found its feet. Her place was bigger, and she liked being the one with the good couch. Then there was Steph, the youngest one, quiet, newly married, worked as a nurse. She mostly listened in the early days. The kind of person who takes a while to say anything, and then says the thing everyone was thinking. The rest floated in and out, and honestly, I never learned all of them, so don't ask. A couple of names I heard maybe twice. They weren't the story, they were the audience, and you'll see why that matters. First few months, it actually was a book club. Rachel would come home and tell me about whatever novel they were arguing over. I liked those nights. She'd be in a good mood, a little tipsy, and we'd talk before bed like we used to. She'd act out the arguments, do impressions of Danielle getting worked up over some character. I'd laugh, she'd laugh, it was good. That part didn't last. Somewhere in there, the club stopped being about books. I noticed because the reading slowed down, but the meetings didn't. She'd come home, and instead of talking about a story, she'd be talking about her friends' husbands. Who did what? Who didn't do enough? Who still doesn't get it? At first it was gossip and I tuned it out. Figured that's just what these nights turn into, a pressure valve, better out than in. Then the gossip started, including me. Small stuff to begin with. She'd mentioned that she brought something up at club, and the something was always me. Like the time I forgot to call the plumber about the slow drain, and she turned it into a whole segment for the group. Came home and told me the girls couldn't believe I'd let it sit a week. I laughed it off. Told myself every couple gets complained about. It's normal. Better she vents to them than bottles it up. That's the story I sold myself for way too long. The shift was gradual, so I want to give you one clear example of it. There was a meeting, maybe a year in, where the assignment was some novel about a marriage falling apart. Rachel came home, and instead of the book, all she wanted to talk about was how the group had spent the whole night diagnosing the husband in it. Then she looked at me across the counter and said, the character reminded her of me. The guy in the book was a distant cold man who let his wife wither, and that was the comparison she was making, cheerful about it, like she'd found a fun connection. I said that guy sounded nothing like me. She said that's exactly what he'd say. And there it was again, the trap where defending yourself is the crime. What I didn't understand at the time was that the diagnosing had a target now, and the target was going home to it every night. The book was just cover. The tone at home changed around the same time. Rachel got into this whole framework where anything I did that she didn't like had a label. If I got quiet during an argument, that was toxic male shutdown. If I got frustrated, that was male aggression. Even when frustrated for me means I go wash dishes and stop talking. If I asked her to maybe not tell her friends about our private business, that was controlling, which was apparently also toxic. Everything landed under the same umbrella. She talked about male toxicity the way some people talk about the weather, constant background. Just assumed. I'm not exaggerating for the story. She genuinely believed that most of what was wrong with me came down to me being a man and not having done the work. She'd say it at dinner, calm as anything, like she was reading me a horoscope. That's just your conditioning talking. You were raised to suppress, it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility. You can't argue with that. Agree and you've confessed, disagree and you've proven it. The club fed all of it. Every meeting, she came back a little more sure. They'd all sit around confirming each other, and whatever theory she walked in with, she walked out with it, stamped and approved. I remember one night she came home and told me, kind of proud, that the group agreed I had a lot of unlearning to do. A room full of people I'd met maybe twice had opinions on my unlearning. Cool. Let me tell you about the kind of guy I actually am. Not because I'm great, but because it matters later. I'm the one who fixes stuff. I cook probably 4 nights a week, and not sad bachelor cooking, actual meals, because she doesn't like to, and I don't mind. I remember her mom's birthday better than she does. I'm the one who orders the flowers. When her car started making a grinding noise, I dealt with it before she even had to think about it. When she had a rough stretch at work, I took the whole load at home, cooking, laundry, the dog, and I didn't make it a thing or keep score out loud. None of that ever made it into a club meeting. The plumber I forgot got 3 weeks of airtime. The 2 years of quietly holding the house together got 0. That's not me feeling sorry for myself. That's just the accounting. A man learns pretty quick that the stuff he does right becomes invisible, and the one thing he drops becomes a headline. One thing that sticks with me since I'm on it. A while back, Rachel got hit with a brutal stretch at work. A project going sideways, her sleeping 4 hours, coming home wrecked. I picked all of it up without being asked. Ran the house solid for about 3 weeks. Had dinner ready when she got in, handled her mother's birthday from top to bottom so she wouldn't have to think about it, kept the dog walked and the laundry moving. When it finally eased up, she thanked me. That felt good, I'll be honest. Then 2 weeks later at club, from what I gathered afterward, the topic was how their husbands show up in a crisis. And Rachel's contribution was a story about how I once loaded the dishwasher wrong during that same stretch, and she had to redo it. 3 weeks of me carrying everything, and the anecdote that made it to the group was a rack of glasses in the wrong spot. I only found that out later, but it fit the pattern so exactly, it barely surprised me. Okay, so here's where the actual mechanism comes in, the thing that ended up mattering most. At some point, Danielle and Rachel got obsessed with this idea they picked up from one of their reads, radical honesty. The pitch was that women hold back too much, and if they could just be totally honest, no filter, no politeness, they'd all be free or whatever. Rachel came home lit up about it. She talked for an hour about how we're taught to manage everyone's feelings and how freeing it would be to stop. The practical version they cooked up was an anonymous system. Danielle set it up, some simple anonymous form the group could all submit to from their phones. Everyone would write their honest thoughts, confessions, complaints, whatever. No names attached. Then at the meeting, someone would read the entries out loud. Nobody knew who wrote what. That was the whole promise. Rachel loved it. She called it a safe space with no male ego in the room to get defensive. She said that to me, in our own kitchen, apparently not hearing herself. I thought the whole thing was a little silly, but harmless. A bunch of grown women passing anonymous notes. I figured worst case they'd roast their husbands in writing, instead of out loud, same as before. What I did not clock was how much detail she was putting into those entries. Because she was anonymous, in her head, she had permission to say anything. The filter she claimed to hate was the only thing that had been protecting me. And anything turned out to include our marriage, the private parts of it, the stuff that's supposed to stay between two people and die with them. She wrote it up like material, like bits for a show, and she read the group's reactions like reviews. I didn't know any of this yet. For a while, things at home were just cold, and I assumed it was a rough patch, the kind every marriage hits. I was actually trying harder during that stretch, which is almost funny now. Bought her flowers for no reason, planned a weekend away, all while she was 2 towns over, reading a room my worst moments. I remember one evening in particular that I couldn't figure out at the time. I'd made a dinner she used to love, lit the whole thing up, wanted to reset us. She came home from a meeting, sat down, and there was this odd little smile on her face the whole meal, like she was still somewhere else, still in on something. I asked what she was smiling about, and she said, "Nothing, just a good night with the girls." I felt like the punchline of a joke I couldn't hear. Turned out I just didn't have the details yet. She'd come straight from performing me and sat down to eat the dinner I made with that smile still on. Knowing what I know now, that meal is the one that gets me. I was trying to fix a marriage she was busy selling for laughs. Then came the night I found out. This was around the middle of last year, warm out. I remember the windows were open and you could hear the neighbors' kids. Rachel was in the shower and her laptop was open on the kitchen table. She'd been doing club stuff on it earlier, some prep for the next meeting. I wasn't snooping, I went to move it so I could put dinner plates down. And the screen woke up when I touched the table. It was the anonymous forms back end, the admin page with all the responses. Danielle had made Rachel a co-admin, so my wife could see everything, including which account submitted what. So much for anonymous, by the way, but hold that thought, it comes back. I stood there and I read. Told myself I'd stop after one. I did not stop after one. Most of it was other people's stuff. Complaints about their own husbands, some of it petty, some of it genuinely sad. A couple that made me feel bad for guys I'd never met. Then I hit Rachel's entries, and it was all me, page after page of me. She'd written up our private life in detail, our bedroom, our marriage, the specific things she found disappointing about me as a husband. All of it laid out for the group to chew on, not vague venting, specifics. Things I'd have been embarrassed to hear repeated to one person, and she'd fed them to the whole room on a schedule for the reaction. Next to some entries, she'd left little notes to herself. Who laughed? Which line landed? One just said, big reaction, use again. She was tracking the audience like a comic working out a set. I want to be clear about what that did to me, because I'm not going to dress it up. It wasn't rage, I want to be accurate about that. I stood very still and read to the bottom of the page, and somewhere in there, the floor just dropped a couple inches under me. The woman I'd been covering for, defending to myself for 2 years, had taken the most private part of our life and turned it into a recurring joke, performed for people who smiled at me in the grocery store parking lot. Some of these women had been in my house. I'd poured them wine. And they'd sat in Danielle's living room and laughed at a version of me my own wife wrote for them. Reading those pages, a bunch of little moments suddenly made sense. There had been a cookout at Danielle's the summer before, couples thing, one of the rare times the husbands got invited. And one of the women, I won't even try to name her, had given me this look across the yard when I was at the grill. Not a friendly look, a knowing one, the kind you give someone when you're in on a joke they don't know exists. I'd shrugged it off at the time, figured I imagined it. Standing at that laptop, it clicked. She wasn't imagining anything. She knew things about me that I'd never told a soul, and she was looking at me across a plate of burgers thinking about them. Her husband was standing right next to me, talking about his truck. I'd been the punchline at that party, and I was the only one who didn't have the script. I closed the laptop before the shower shut off, put it back at the exact angle it had been, ate dinner across from her. We talked about nothing, some show she wanted to start. She had no idea I'd seen it, and I decided, right there at the table, that I wasn't going to tell her. And here's the part I know some of you won't get, so let me explain it. I didn't confront her because I didn't want to fight where I somehow ended up apologizing. You know how those go. If I'd walked in waving that laptop, she'd have flipped it inside of 10 minutes. I was invading her privacy, I was controlling, I was proving her whole point about men. The actual thing she did would have evaporated and I'd have been the problem by bedtime, maybe holding her while she cried, about how betrayed she felt that I looked at her screen. I'd seen the move too many times, so I said nothing, and I started paying attention instead. Quiet has its uses. A man who's stopped talking isn't always beaten. Sometimes he's just finally listening. The first couple weeks after that night were strange. I'd look at her across the dinner table and run the entries in my head, and she'd have no idea. Part of me wanted to just leave, pack a bag, and be done. But I'd have walked out with nothing but hurt, and she'd have spun it into one more story for the group. The husband who couldn't handle honesty and ran. I wasn't going to hand her that ending. So I stayed, and I got very calm, and I paid attention to everything. I stopped defending myself in arguments, stopped taking the bait when she reached for a label. She read that as me, finally doing the work, which suited me fine. Let her think the framework was winning. Really, I'd just stopped spending energy on a person who was writing me up either way. You'd be surprised how steady you get once you stop hoping someone will suddenly be fair to you. I put that energy into watching the club instead. And the club, it turned out, was where the whole thing was going to settle itself. Over the next couple months, I did something I'm honestly a little proud of. Nothing dramatic, no plan on a whiteboard. I just watched the club through the cracks I already had. Rachel still talked about it constantly, still left the laptop open, still assumed I wasn't really taking any of it in. To her, I was background, the guy who reheats and nods. And slowly I noticed the thing that changed everything. The anonymous entries weren't all pointing the same direction anymore. See, when Rachel bragged about radical honesty, she pictured it as a weapon that only ever fired one way, at the husbands, at men, at me. But honesty doesn't take sides. You prop that door open, everyone walks through it, including the people you didn't expect. Rachel would read me bits sometimes, annoyed, not realizing she was narrating her own ending. Somebody had written that the club had gotten mean. Somebody else wrote that they didn't recognize it anymore, that it used to be about books and now it was just an autopsy of men who weren't there to answer. Rachel rolled her eyes and called whoever wrote it not ready to do the work, same line she used on me. Apparently it was going around, but the entries kept coming, meeting after meeting, and one voice in there kept getting sharper. I didn't know it was Steph yet. I just knew there was someone in that room who was quietly reaching the end of it. You can feel that in writing even when you don't know the hand. A couple of the entries from that stretch stuck with me. One of them just asked, flat out, when the group had decided that being honest meant being cruel. Another one said that the writer had started dreading meetings, that she'd leave feeling worse about her own marriage because the club trained her to hunt for things to resent. That one actually got to me, because it wasn't even about Rachel, it was about what the whole thing did to the women in it. They'd built a machine for finding fault, and then were surprised they couldn't stop finding it at home. Rachel read that one out, to me annoyed, said the group was losing its nerve. Meanwhile, the sharp voice kept showing up, meeting after meeting, and it stopped hedging. Somewhere in there it went from the club has gotten mean to naming, without names, exactly what one member was doing. Rachel didn't see it building, because she was still convinced she was the one holding the room. I could see it from my kitchen, reading over the wreckage of my own marriage, and I knew before she did that it was going to come down on her. I didn't warn her. I'm not going to pretend I did. She'd built the thing. She could sit in it. Here's what I pieced together later about Steph. She was newly married, like I said, still in the good part of it, the part where you can't imagine mocking the guy. And at some point, Rachel described a husband in one of her entries in enough detail that Steph recognized the shape of it. Not literally her husband, but the situation. A guy who cooks, who fixes things, who keeps his head down, who gets nothing back but a diagnosis. Steph was married to one of those. And hearing that kind of man get carved up week after week by a woman who plainly had it good and couldn't see it, something in her turned over. She told me a version of this much later, so I'm filling gaps, but that's the gist. She started small too, an entry here and there pushing back on the tone. Then she stopped being subtle. The club had a rhythm, roughly every 2 weeks. The meeting where it came apart was near the end of last summer. I know it was still warm because Rachel wore the green dress she saves for when she wants to feel in charge of a room. She ironed it that afternoon, which she never does, so she was expecting a big night. She was right about that part. The reading that week had them on some book about honesty and choosing sides, and Danielle built the anonymous prompt around it. The prompt was basically, knowing everything you now know, whose side are you actually on? Rachel thought that was a softball. She genuinely walked in expecting the whole room to line up behind her. I wasn't there, obviously. I got all of this afterward, partly from Rachel when she finally cracked open, partly from Steph, partly from filling the gaps myself. But I've turned it over enough times now that I can walk you through it clean. They did the usual: wine, the good couch, phones out, the form. The entries came in anonymous, the way Rachel designed it, the way she loved. Danielle read them out, one at a time, in that even HR voice. The first few were normal, safe, nobody in particular stuff. Then the tone shifted. One entry said the person was tired of coming to a club that existed to humiliate men who weren't even in the room to defend themselves. Rachel apparently smiled at that, still sure it was about somebody else. The next one was sharper. It said one member in particular had turned the group into her personal stage, and that the man she kept mocking sounded like the only decent person in any of her stories. The room went quiet. Rachel stopped smiling, because that one had detail. Details she recognized because she'd written the original version of it herself. Whoever wrote this knew the exact things Rachel had been saying about me and flipped every one of them around. The entry said the husband being described didn't sound like a disappointment at all. It said he sounded like a man carrying a whole marriage on his back while his wife sold tickets to laugh at him. It said the person who should be embarrassed in that story was not him. And then the line Rachel repeated to me later, almost word for word, because it clearly went in like a splinter. The entry said, "He deserves better than this room." Danielle read it out flat, no reaction, because that was the rule. Anonymous is anonymous, honesty is honesty, and Danielle is a rules person. The rules were suddenly not on Rachel's side, and there was nothing she could do about it. Rachel tried to laugh it off, said something about how someone's clearly projecting their own marriage onto mine. But the next entry came, and it wasn't about husbands in general anymore. It was about her, not by name. It didn't need a name. It described exactly what she'd been doing, the performing, the little notes about who laughed, the way she'd turned her own marriage into content for a room. And it asked the group one plain question. If she talks about the person she's supposed to love most like this, to a room of near strangers, what does she say about each of you when you're not here? That one landed like a slap, from what I understand. A couple of the women wouldn't look at Rachel, because it's a fair question. You sit in a group with someone who does that, and sooner or later, everyone runs the math on themselves. If you'll gut your husband for a laugh, the friend across the couch is easy. There was one more entry that night, the one Rachel talked about least, which tells you it was the worst. It didn't attack her at all, and that's what made it land. It just described the husband, the real one, the one under all the material she'd been performing. It said this was a man who cooked, who remembered the birthdays, who fixed the car and never mentioned it, who took the whole house on his back when his wife was drowning at work and asked for nothing. And it asked the room to sit with the fact that this was the person one of them had chosen to turn into a bit. Whoever wrote it had heard Rachel's own stories and pulled the truth out of them, the truth she'd been narrating over, because every cruel anecdote she'd ever told the group had a decent thing hiding inside it if you just stopped laughing long enough to look. Steph had been listening for it the whole time. Rachel said that when Danielle read that one, nobody said anything at all for a while, just the sound of someone's glass being set down on the table. Rachel's version of the night, the one I finally dragged out of her weeks later, is that it felt like the floor tilted under the couch. She'd built a machine that only ran one way, and it had swung around and pointed straight back at her, using her own ammunition. She did the one thing she had left. She demanded to know who wrote it, said the anonymity should be suspended, that this was a coordinated attack, and she had a right to face the person doing it. And the room reminded her of her own sermon. Anonymity is sacred. No egos, no defensiveness, no taking it personally, safe space. All the lines she'd preached for months. They handed her words right back to her and watched her choke on them. Danielle, ever the HR one, said very calmly that they couldn't make an exception, that the entire point was that nobody gets unmasked, which was rich because Danielle and Rachel both had admin access. They could see or work out exactly who submitted what. They knew. But saying that out loud would mean admitting the anonymous safe space was never actually anonymous, that the two of them had been able to see the names the whole time. So Danielle sat there and protected the system instead of protecting her friend. Picked the rule over the person, the same way she probably does at work when someone becomes a liability. And Rachel understood, in that 1 second, that she was completely alone in a room full of her own friends. Her rule was holding her down, and her best friend was making sure it stayed that way. The meeting basically ended there. People found reasons to leave early, sudden headaches, early mornings. The wine went unfinished, which for that group was a first. Rachel came home before I expected her. I was on the couch with the dog, half watching something. She walked in still in the green dress, and she didn't say anything for a long moment, which for her is nearly unheard of. Then she sat down across from me and asked, out of nowhere, if I thought she was a cruel person. I'd known about the laptop for months at that point. I could have unloaded the whole thing right there, every entry, every note about who laughed. I didn't. I just asked her what happened, and for the first time in years, she actually told me something true. Not all of it, not the worst of it, but real. She told me the club had turned on her, that someone had said things about how she talks about her husband, and that it had gotten under her skin. She wouldn't meet my eyes on the words, her husband, because we both knew exactly which husband that was, and he was sitting 2 feet away. I let her talk. Didn't fill the silences, didn't rescue her from them, just let the quiet do its work for once. Near the end, she said the thing I'll actually keep from all of this. She said small that she didn't understand how it happened, that she built that space to feel safe, and it ate her alive. I didn't say I told you so. Didn't say I knew, didn't say a word about the laptop. I just told her that maybe honesty's only fun when it's aimed at someone else. She went quiet again after that, and stayed quiet the rest of the night. The fallout took a few weeks to finish. The club didn't survive it. A couple of the women drifted off first, then a couple more. And inside a month, there was no club. Just a group chat where the last message sat there unanswered for weeks. Danielle backed away from Rachel fast. The HR instinct, I figure, smell the fire and get clear before it reaches you. She stopped inviting Rachel to things, stopped texting first, did the polite slow fade that people like her have down to a craft. No fight, no falling out, just fewer and fewer replies until there were none. Rachel noticed. She'd built her whole social life around that group, and it dissolved under her in about 6 weeks. The woman who ran the room ended up with an empty room. She'd sit with her phone some evenings, scrolling, waiting on messages that weren't coming. I won't pretend it wasn't a little satisfying to watch, because it was, but mostly it was just quiet at our house, a different kind than before. She tried to keep a piece of it going for a while, floated a smaller, closer version of the club to a couple of the women, said the old one had lost its way. Nobody bit. She suggested to Danielle that the two of them grab coffee, just them, and got a reply 3 days later about how crazy work had been. Then nothing. The one time it got concrete was a few weeks after everything fell apart. We ran into Danielle at the hardware store of all places, Rachel and me together on a Saturday, and I watched my wife light up and walk over, and I watched Danielle do the whole warm act, the "oh my gosh, how are you?" while her eyes were already scanning for the exit. 90 seconds of nothing. Then Danielle remembered she was so late for something and was gone. Rachel stood in the aisle holding a pack of light bulbs, and I could see it land on her, right there next to the paint chips, that this was permanent. The room she used to run wanted nothing to do with her, and she finally understood there was no unmasking her way back in. She didn't say anything about it. We bought the bulbs and drove home. Steph is the one who reached out to me. This was maybe 2 or 3 weeks after the meeting. I got a message from a number I didn't have saved, and it just said, "He deserved better." The same words from the entry, so I knew right away who it was and what she'd done. I sat with the phone a minute before I answered, told her thanks, that it meant more than she probably knew. She said she couldn't sit there and listen to it anymore, that she kept picturing her own husband on that couch getting read out for laughs, that she'd want someone to say something if it were him. She said the anonymous form made it easy, that she never could have said it to Rachel's face, and she felt a little bad about that, told her not to. The whole point of the thing was to say what you couldn't say out loud, and she was the only one who used it for anything but cruelty. We never talked again after that, and that's fine. She didn't do it for me. She did it because it was the right call, and she was the only one in that room with the backbone to make it. A stranger stuck her neck out for a guy she'd never met, while 5 women who'd been in my house said nothing. I think about that more than I think about Rachel, honestly. Here's the thing that stayed with me about it. Every one of those other women had a husband too. Every one of them heard what Rachel did to hers and knew, on some level, they could be next on the couch. And most of them just laughed along, because laughing along is safe and speaking up costs something. Steph was the only one who did the math and decided a decent man she'd never met was worth the cost. She used the one tool that let her do it without her name on it, which some people would call cowardly. I'd call it the only smart move available in a room like that. You don't walk into that group and say it to Rachel's face, you'd be the next entry. You slip it in the way Rachel taught everyone to, anonymous, no filter, no ego. Steph beat her at her own game using her own rules. I'll respect that for the rest of my life. So, where does all this leave things? Rachel and I are still together, which I know isn't the ending some of you are hoping for. But it's different now, and the difference is the entire point. She doesn't perform me anymore. There's no room left to perform me in, no couch, no audience, no anonymous form to feed. She found out firsthand what it feels like to be the one on the table, discussed, judged, laughed about by people who smile at you later. and she found out with no way to fight back because she'd written the rules herself. That did something no argument from me ever could have. You cannot lecture a person into understanding what it's like to be the punchline. They have to sit in the chair. She sat in it, in the green dress, in front of everyone. I never did confront her about the laptop. Never told her I read every word. Didn't need to. The night she came home and asked if she was cruel, I got everything a confrontation would have given me, minus the part where she turns it around and I end up saying, sorry, the last thing worth telling. A while after everything settled, she asked me one evening why I never told her friends anything about our marriage, all those years, when she'd handed them everything about me. Fair question. I told her the truth. I said it never once occurred to me that our life together was something you hand to a room for entertainment. That when something was wrong between us, I thought the two of us were supposed to fix it, not workshop it in someone's living room. She didn't have an answer for that. She just nodded and looked down at her hands. And that was the closest thing to justice I was ever gonna get, so I took it and I didn't ask for more. Anyway, that's the story. She wanted radical honesty. She got it, anonymously. And the funniest part, the part I still turn over at night, is that she was right about one thing the entire time. There was toxicity poisoning that marriage. She just spent 2 years pointing at the wrong person in the room. TLDR wife turned our private life into a bit for her book club, built an anonymous honesty system to do it, and that same system anonymously told the whole room she was the problem. She couldn't unmask anyone because she's the one who made the mask. We stayed married, she stopped treating me like material, and I never had to teach her a thing. The room did it for me.